Peace, family. Welcome to African Esquire TV. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie. As always, before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please do like, comment, and subscribe. In addition, if you could also add yourself to my Telegram channel. Telegram is a decentralized app that I update regularly. In addition, if you could please add yourself to my channel on Odyssey. Odyssey is basically the same as YouTube, but it is decentralized. Therefore, censorship is not an issue. Today, the subject is going to be one that I think is very telling for the times inside of the modern discourse as far as African liberation, a lot of it being centered around the issue of reparations. The question that I'll pose for everyone is, what good are reparations to the slave? And what I mean by that is that what good are reparations, the commonly thought about way that people go about reparations, that being payment, to a people who are still enslaved by a system, and the system is still actively taking from them, still actively abstracting from their labor, still actively taking their resources. What good are reparations to that person? Now, today we're going to talk about reparations in the context of Jamaica. Jamaica has recently put out a request that they're going to be making to the British country that they are a part of, the Commonwealth that they're a part of. They're going to be making a request for reparations. So let's read about this.
The Queen of Britain will soon receive one. It will be from Jamaica. The Caribbean country is asking the British Queen to cough up billions. What for? As reparations for slavery. Quick background. Jamaica was a British colony from 1655 to 1962. The colonizer introduced sugarcane cultivation in Jamaica, and to support it, Britain introduced slaves. People were stolen from their homes and forced to work in the field. Many were shipped across to other countries as part of the transatlantic slave trade. In 1662, there were 400 slaves in Jamaica. By 1734, the number became 86,000. Between 1702 and 1749, nearly 300,000 slaves were imported to Jamaica. More than 100,000 were exported. It was only in the year 1807 that the British Parliament abolished slave trade, and it abolished slavery in 1837. By then, Britain had abducted and enslaved at least 12.5 million people. 12.5 million people enslaved. Many of them were Jamaicans. In 1833, Britain paid off 46,000 British slave owners. They were given 20 million pounds, almost 40% of that time's annual budget. What was this money for? To compensate for the quote-unquote loss of human property. What about these human properties themselves? What did the government give them? Forget compensation. Did Imperial Britain even offer an apology to the slaves and their families? The legacy of the slave trade still stings Jamaica. The country has been asking for justice for some time now. In 2015, then British Prime Minister David Cameron visited Jamaica. Jamaican leaders asked his government to pay reparations. Cameron was told to atone for the historical sin. The Prime Minister refused to even offer an apology. Here's what he said instead. David Cameron told Jamaica to move on. Reports published around that time revealed why he may have been so anti-reparation. Turns out one of Cameron's own family members was among many slave owners to have received compensation for loss of slaves.
All articles that I read from will be in the description. So this first article says, Jamaicans are demanding reparatory justice in all forms for the UK's past wrongdoings, including slave trade that was enforced upon their ancestors. So when you hear reparatory justice in all forms, that sounds very affirmative. That sounds very strong. It sounds very all-encompassing. But whenever you actually get down to the fine print, that's where you figure out, is that really what they're calling for? Many European countries, primarily the UK, had been involved in various colonialist practices in the past century, changing the demographic, economic, and social structures of continents from Africa to the Americas and the Middle East. They had inflicted significant damages amounting to genocides over native populations, for example, Canada and the United States and Australia and other places in Central and South America, conducting a slave trade by uprooting people from their homelands and shipping them off to far continents for illicit colonialist aims. Jamaica, which has suffered from those atrocities much, now seeks billions of dollars in reparations from the UK, which had colonized the country until 1962 and used the ancestors of modern day Jamaicans for slave trade. Our African ancestors were forcibly removed from their home and suffered unparalleled atrocities in Africa to carry out forced labor to the benefit of the British Empire, said Olivia Grange, Jamaica's Minister of Sports, Youth, and Culture. Because Jamaica is still part of the Commonwealth, okay, the British monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, still serves as the official head of the Caribbean state. As a result, under a petition, Jamaica has sought reparations from the UK government. The petition has not yet been filed and is pending internal legal process. They said, we are hoping for reparatory justice in all forms that one would expect if they are to really ensure that we get justice from injustices to repair the damages that our ancestors experienced. Of course, this, hope is very unreasonable because you're hoping from the people who oppressed you, you're hoping from the people that enslaved you, and it's almost like very flowery that how this is being painted. Like, this is the people who just so happened to enslave you. They didn't mean it. This is the people who just so happened to take control over your people and enforce their colonial will on you. It wasn't intentional, it just so happened. So therefore, we're hoping that you will right this injustice. And to actually have that hope be reasonable, one, you would have to believe that the place that you're asking for hope from has a disposition to seek out justice on its own without being forced to do so, which the UK has not been historically. And another thing, you would also want to be hopeful that those people are actually regret what they've done, meaning they regret raiding your country, they regret taking your resources, they regret putting you in a position that you're begging today for your former colonial master and present colonial master to pay you some money. And that's just not reasonable either, because I don't believe that both past, present, and future, I don't believe that the UK is at all in regret for what they have done to African people globally and to other people who are indigenous globally. I don't think so, because if you look at the riches that they've gotten in return, which we're going to talk about, for their mass exploitation, they have every reason to be proud of that legacy. And that's what you hear a lot coming out of the UK. You hear a lot of these people talking about, we should be proud of this empire. Of course, they're usually white people, but we should be proud of this empire. We should celebrate this empire. This is our legacy, because they understand that without a history of exploitation, without a history of colonialism and enslavement, the British, the UK, the English would be nothing. They would be a people who, if history had gone that way, they would have had none of the riches, they would have had none of the control and none of the power. They only got that power by that exploitation. So you're hoping for justice from a system that has never been about justice. You're hoping for a right to be wronged, but from a people who do not look at that wrong as being wrong. They look at it as being right because it was right for them. This hopefulness, unfortunately, enslaves many of our people into a begging posture and has us continually asking our masters to change gears, shift the system, make it work for us, although the system is doing what it was created to do. Now, it says, while the UK has not addressed its past slavery practices in terms of paying reparations to victims in aiding colonized countries, where British enslavers were mainly the driving force behind the country's colonial policies, London has been so keen to compensate so-called losses of its former slave owners following the abolishment of slavery in 1834. You heard that right. They did not compensate any of the Africans who have been enslaved and dehumanized, but they compensated the people who lost their property, who lost their chattel slaves, who lost their profit. That's the people who they actually compensated. It says the UK had paid billions of dollars to the slaveholders and their inheritors, taking a a 20 million pound loan, which was big money at the time of the abolishment of slavery. The British state had continued to pay even interest payments to those slaveholder inheritors until 2015 in the name of compensating their illicit losses. So that's something I had no clue about prior to reading this article. Okay, they compensated the former slave owners. I've heard that. Had no clue that these people, these arrogant, snobbish people, had the nerve to continue paying the people who enslaved. Also, not just Jamaica. I mean, many of the Caribbean countries, obviously Africans in America, prior to the United States being independent, the United States was also under the United States country was under the British monarchy. So you got that enslavement, you have enslavement all over the world. They actually compensated the people who lost out under chattel slaves and not the people who were actually enslaved up until 2015. So a huge insult, obviously, to any African people who were descended from the people who they compensated. But this is what justice is to them. Notice they said that this is what they were doing to right their past debts. And think about the fact that it said that they went into debt to actually pay this back, which shows you this whole idea that the government has to have enough money to pay and to pay their debtors in order for you to get some type of payment. That's just baloney, obviously, because these people were willing to possibly self-destruct in order to make sure that the people who were slave owners did get some type of payment. So that shows you right there how these people operate. Once again, reparations has nothing to do with what's right or wrong. We have to get that out of our head. It's really not, at least in the current system, about what's right or wrong. In the current system, reparations is solely about who has the power to enforce it, who has the power to get those people to do what they want. If you're not a person who is seen as having power, then your reparations claim will always be ignored. So this is obviously very telling, obviously. Both the messaging coming out of Jamaica that this is like a hopeful thing, that we're hoping that you do this and we're going to petition the Commonwealth and petition hoping that you do the right thing. That's one thing. But here's the other part of it. It says the petition calls for Britain to compensate Jamaicans 7.6 billion pounds as reparations. Just 7.6 billion pounds for instilling your ancestors, taking you from your homeland, depriving you of your cultural inheritance, putting you inside of a system, enforcing your colonial standards on the people, taking their culture, making them slaves, making them property, making them work for you and earn you hundreds of billions of dollars. They're only asking for 7.6 billion pounds, which makes me wonder, first of all, it says it was approved by Jamaica's National Commission on Reparations. The petition will be reviewed by the country's attorney and 3 legal teams and then sent to Queen Elizabeth. It's crazy. So the question obviously is, who's going to benefit from $7.6 billion? Clearly, this is not going to be something that's distributed to all Jamaicans, because if so, this is not going to be anything that touches the tip of the iceberg as far as the effects of colonialism. I would be very suspectful that this is probably going to go to some elites, and that tends to be the situation inside of neo-colonial states, even whenever reparations packages are awarded, that they are not beneficial to the people, or they don't address the atrocities of the people who have suffered the most. Now, the fact that Queen Elizabeth has to sign off on this, another insult. How are you asking for reparations from a system when you're still operating in the system and still being beholden to the colonial system? You're not asking for reparations. You're asking for some payment. That's all. You're asking for a payoff. I just want some money to, get me through. I don't need these past wrongs righted. I just want to continue the relationship, but do it inside of a way that looks better, at least to the public, where we can get some money and we could feel good about ourselves. We could tell everyone, hey, they helped us out. That's all they're really asking for. Now, I should also add that news is saying that essentially this petition will probably go nowhere because of the issue of jurisdiction. That is, Jamaica still submits to the British jurisdiction and does not have independent jurisdiction or a higher court that they're going to bring this petition to. Therefore, it's very easy again for this to be ignored and just become another one of the new reparations claims that the former slaves want to put forth, but we can just continue business as usual, as we've always done. Now, I said in a previous video, I was not aware that Jamaica was still a part of the Commonwealth, and I now know that. The reason why I think I was under the impression that probably wasn't the case because I just view Jamaica and Jamaican people as they are. They're very resilient people. They're fighters, anti-colonial fighters. Obviously, we had some of our greats come out of that country, people like Marcus Garvey, people like Bob Marley, people who are very vocal, who are anti-imperialist. So for that reason, I was actually surprised and taken aback by that. Now, I should say also, I'm very taken aback by any Africans who would submit to a British Commonwealth whenever you are of the position that colonialism was an act, a crime against humanity, whatever you want to call it. If you're of the opinion that colonialism was wrong, why would you continue a relationship with a colonial power? That's almost as if someone were to say that, hey, what you did to me, hurting me, assaulting me, being violent to me, that was wrong, but we're still going to be best friends even though the violence continues. You would look at that person and you would say you have battered victim syndrome, because any type of person of dignity would not continue a violent relationship on them. And that's what African people have. We have the battered syndrome, I forget exact name, the battered victims syndrome, to where we have an affinity for our oppressor. We have a love for the system that continues to enslave us. We feel like that we have nowhere to go but to that system, to that abuser, to that oppressor. And because of that, they can continue to pull these maneuvers on us. Now, I want to look a little bit more into the Commonwealth situation. So I found a couple articles on that. It says, at present, British companies control more than $1 trillion worth of Africa's key resources: gold, diamonds, gas, oil, and an area of land roughly 4 times the size of the UK. All countries use diplomacy to lobby in their own interest. There's nothing wrong with that. But in Britain's case, the Commonwealth has served very nicely to advocate its particular shopping lists: liberalized, extractor-friendly regimes, low corporate tax rates, and a creative system of tax havens predominantly located in, you guessed it, other Commonwealth countries. As a result, Africa loses 3 billion euros more each year than it receives in aid, loans, and remittances. In the Caribbean, 14 nations, including a good number of Commonwealth members, are attempting to sue the British government for reparations for 4 centuries of slavery, and Britain is using jurisdictional issues arising from the Commonwealth to block that claim. But why, to borrow the words of those who insist slavery left no trace of intergenerational injustice, talk ancient history? This very week, as the Commonwealth flags were proudly flying in Parliament, the government finally met Caribbean leaders after a public outcry after the cruel treatment of Windrush. Citizens forced a U-turn on immigration policy. Caribbean heads of state wanted to know why. Why, master? Why Britain, having invited their strong, talented, and motivated citizens to this country in the 1960s, has been seeking to deport their children? In the 2010s, when the dust of the last-minute U-turn has settled, the residue will be a realization that while Britain is proud of the institution of the Commonwealth, its Black and brown people are regarded with contempt. So this is a one-sided relationship, the Commonwealth. One-sided being that you have the elite and the people who are the masses, African people, who are not going to benefit. And you might have a couple neo-colonial puppets who might get a bone thrown to them every once in a while, as we normally see inside of these relationships, but it's one-sided. It's not something that's to the benefit of African people. Anyone telling you otherwise is someone who has no correct analysis of what people need. People don't need a continuation of colonialism into the 21st century. What they need is sovereignty. What they need is power. What they need is control over their own lives. If they're really human beings, if I'm a human being, if I'm a real person, if I have the same rights, if I'm equal to you, then as a human being, I should have a right to determine what life I will live, what life my family will live. And as a community, we have a right to determine what our community will live, how our community will live. That's the rights afforded to human beings. That's not the rights afforded to Africans inside of the neo-colonial world. Africans are told what to do. Africans are told what's in their best interest. Africans are told what companies to let in. Africans are told what their economies have to look like. That's what being chattel is. You're being told by someone how to live, where to stay, what you can have access to, what you cannot have access to, and how your government is going to look like our government. Now, a little bit more on the Commonwealth. It says, it has now been 51. This is an article, very vibrant article written by a man named Morris Houghton. He says, it has now been 51 years since Jamaica had its independence. It's written in 2014, by the way. However, it is like a baby whose umbilical cord has never been severed at birth. The baby grows up underdeveloped with limited mobility, still attached to its mother by an extended umbilical cord. This attachment restricts the baby's movements while giving an uncaring mother a great degree of control. She can impose her will, put unfair demands on the child, withhold food, and take from the child if the child does not conform to her wishes. This metaphor is a depiction of the neo-colonial control over Jamaica. For many years, colonialism milked Jamaica and other Caribbean countries by imposing a false identity on our people, diminishing resources that affected growth and development. In spite of the richness of these countries, they are still referred to as third world and underdeveloped countries. All the post-colonial unrest and instability in the Caribbean has the footprint of traditional colonial entities. They usually come into the country, attach themselves to some factions, mostly opposition parties, then supply guns and ammunition, dangle the carrot, and influence elections. Just what we see all the time playing out. We're seeing this happen right now in Haiti. Their main objective is to prevent governments that would encourage self-reliance, equality, justice for the people. They rather keep the masses poor and needy so that they can pass their breadbasket and their offering plate in which they drop a penny and take a pound. They come under false presence of human rights advocates, freedom fighters, the stability agents, while instigating and spreading propaganda to create unrest among the people. They create artificial shortage of basic foods like bread, milk, flour, so that people cannot eat, all to undermine the government. Given the circumstance, any baby would buckle under such pressure, while the mother undoubtedly grins as she gets her way, just like the old ways of gestation when a baby must shut its mouth and take whatever comes its way. He goes on to say, all elected officials in Jamaica must take an oath of allegiance to Her Majesty today. I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty, the Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs, her successors, according to the law. He said, I remember as a young man in Jamaica watching a parliament debate where Michael Manley stated that he could not mean it in his heart when he was obliged to so swear. He said, while he respects the monarch, he did not think the people of Jamaica should have to take such an oath. I remember the opposition pushing back on this idea. Manley wanted true independence on all fronts and was not willing to be anyone's puppet. And he was not afraid to associate himself with those the world hated. He had his own mind. Manley put up a good fight against neocolonial forces. So this paints for you the picture. Not only is the Commonwealth existence of Jamaica, not only are they given, the foreign entities have a benefit and have a privilege as far as pushing their agendas inside of a sovereign country. Also, there's a mental aspect. Mentally, the people become beholden to their colonizers again and again. Even though they're given this illusion of independence, they're only reconfirming that their true allegiance is to white supremacy. Their true allegiance is to this queen who's going to continue their relationship with them despite all of the crimes that have been done to them. So I go back to the question that I asked in the beginning of this video. What good is reparations to a slave? What good is reparations being payment? If that's how you're defining reparations, what good would that what was it? what good would that 7.6 billion pounds or $10.5 billion be to a people who are still enslaved? Their land is still owned, their commerce is still owned, their people are still beholden to the master. What good are reparations without power? And I say this because this is not just in Jamaica. This is everywhere, I think, where African people are. There's more and more talks of reparations. And if we're not careful, some people will take the privileges of being the spokespersons for our people and make these proclamations. We just want reparations. It's what's right. It's justice. Do what's just. And whenever they get something that is subpar at best, these people who want to so much be the person who drove it home, be the person who gets celebrated for finally winning a reparations battle, these people get to turn around and tell the people that, hey, you should be happy that you have this payment, and where your people still lack power, that's something that is inconsequential to your liberation. But if we actually thought about it, why not call for power? Why not call for ownership of your own resources? I mean, that's just common sense. Like, why do I want someone to give me money when what I have in my own soil is worth more, but it's owned by people who are far away? When you're talking about, in the context of the United States, I personally do not like reparations talks whenever they do not involve releasing the many African men and women who are inside of the mass incarceration system. To me, that's first. How do you have a people who are enslaved today, and we're going to get some type of payment from the government? And we've seen the types of things that have come out, whether it's like some small money that people are talking about getting some type of mortgage, like equity or whatever. And people are still enslaved today. We have a common understanding. The prison industrial complex is not separate and apart from slavery. It is a modern manifestation of slavery. How do you even have that conversation when your people are still slaves today? Power without actual or reparations without power, again, it's a payoff. It's not anything that's going to be of worth or notability to our people's liberation if we're not actually thinking strategically about how do we get our power instead of just getting some money inside of our pocket. Now, I want to talk more about the $10.5 billion that the Jamaican government is asking for. As I said, that's very, very low for enslavement. That's very, very low for colonialism. That's very, very low, just period. I mean, you see people hand out money like that all the time, especially these rich entities. And so we have to understand not just the crime of colonialism, which was a crime, not just the crime of enslavement, which was a crime. These are some of the most detestable things that have happened in human history. And I would even say the most detestable if you're thinking about the length of time that they lasted and the still present effects on the people today, not to mention the horrible, grotesque acts done by the enslavers. To me, that equals the most detestable things done in human history. But despite that, we have $10.5 billion that's going to pay it off. I want us to just understand how much money the colonials made from colonialism, in particular, focused on Britain today. Now, there's an estimate. Again, all links, you can do your own research. I looked it up. How much did the British Empire make? Now, there's an estimate that the British Empire made $683.3 billion from one site called Love Money. I think that is way low. $683.3 billion. The reason why I would say that's low is because we have to understand how capitalism operates. Now, let's assume that this is true, that the actual British government made that money from colonialism and enslavement, as far as what was actually given directly to the government. The way that we understand that capitalism works and that colonialism, neocolonialism works, is not just by merely getting money directly from people, but actually by working cooperatively with corporations. So essentially, they get to hide behind the guise of, hey, it wasn't us, it was that company. Hey, it wasn't us, it was that company. Whereas they're actually very present. They have their interests being met. Understand, for example, that even though these people might not get direct payment, that they are securing their future, that they're securing assets, that they're helping their friends, and they're working with companies to ensure that the country's elite get to be upheld through the colonial exploits that these companies do. So it's a interchangeable relationship, and that's what we should understand. You might see the United States government, and you're like, oh, they're not doing anything too crazy, but then you understand the corporations, how they work with the government. And then on top of that, how you have the CIA and FBI who are working cooperatively with that. And then we have these economic hitmen and all these things like that. All these things work together. So we have to understand colonialism broadly, not inside of the formalized colonialism way, that being one country that's going to say, hey, I'm the colonizer and give me your money. No, that's not how it actually plays out in today. Neo-colonialism is a lot more covert. And because of that, they've been able to get away with things. So to more, I think, appropriately, and this is not all, but I think you should look at the East Indian Company, because obviously it was the most powerful company in Britain during the colonial times, and was also very much instrumental in both the slave trade and also inside of colonialism. Now, there's one article I found. It says, think Google or Apple are powerful. You've never heard of the East Indian Company, making a profit enterprise so mighty. It once ruled nearly all of the Indian subcontinent. Between 1600 and 1874, it built the most powerful corporation the world has ever known, complete with its own army, its own territory, and near total hold on trade of a product that now seems quintessentially British, tea. At the dawn of the 17th century, in 1600, a group of Englishmen asked Queen Elizabeth I for a royal charter that would let them voyage to the East Indies on behalf of the crown in exchange for a monopoly on trade. The merchants put up £70,000 of their own money to finance the venture, and the East Indian Company was born. The East Indian Company's royal charter gave it the ability to wage war, and initially it used military force to protect itself and fight rival traders. That's, I think, very interesting for us to also just highlight, because we know in the modern context, again, of neo-colonialism, these corporations, they seem so innocent, right? They're not going in and hurting anyone. But you should understand, the National Security Defense Forces work hand in hand with these big corporations. You don't see these things, but trust me, it's just not a coincidence that you'll have a leader who does not want to let a certain company come into their land and take control over all of the land to start mining or whatever, and then all of a sudden that leader is assassinated. Or you'll have a group or activists. So many activists get killed. Do you think those activists are getting killed because of some type of interracial violence? No, they're getting killed oft by the secret police, you can say. The police that you don't see. The military that gets to hide and no one really knows what they're doing. That's who's really offing them. Now, it says, financial woes and widespread awareness of the company's abuses of power eventually led Britain to seek direct control of the East Indian Company. And in 1858, after a long wind down, the British government finally ended the company's rule. By 1874, the company was a shell of its former self and was dissolved. By then, the East Indian Company had been involved in everything from getting China hooked on opium. The company grew opium in India and illegally exported it to China in exchange for coveted Chinese goods, to international slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, conducted slaving expeditions, transporting slaves and used slave labor throughout the 17th and 18th century. So this company, of course, was very much an instrument or an arm of the British Commonwealth, the British monarchy, I guess what it would be called back then. How much did this company make? Now, again, this is not the totality. And I think this other article will show that we really can't measure how much these people actually made. But it says that the East Indian Company, this is a different article, it said that they would be worth about $7.9 trillion. Now, that's still a lot compared to even companies today. Most, I think like Apple was like something like 3 trillion or something like that. 7.9 trillion is still the largest to this point today. Now, this other article, though, I think even shows how much more this company made that will never be accounted for, because we're just finding out new things as time goes. It says Britain stole $45 trillion from India. New research from an economist, Utsa Patnaik, just published by Columbia University Press, deals a crushing blow to a narrative. It draws on nearly 2 centuries of detailed data on tax and trade. Patnack calculated that Britain drained a total of nearly $45 trillion from India from 1765 to 1938. The East India Company began collecting taxes in India and then cleverly used a portion of those revenues, about a third, to fund the purchase of Indian goods for British use. In other words, instead of paying for Indian goods out of pocket, British traders acquired them for free, buying from peasants and weavers using money that it had just been taken from them. So, give you a visualization. It's imagine the government saying, "Hey, we're going to tax you. The tax is going to be $100," and then you pay that tax of $100, and then they come back to you. It's like, "Oh, for that thing that you're going to give me, here's $10." That's how they actually were able to exploit and rape these people. Horrible. It was a scam, theft on a grand scale, yet most Indians were unaware of what was going on because the agent who collected the taxes was not the same one who showed up to buy their goods. How colonialism works. Had it been the same person, they surely would have smelled a rat. Some of the stolen goods were consumed in Britain and the rest were re-exported elsewhere. The re-export system allowed Britain to finance a free flow of imports from Europe, including strategic materials like iron, tar, timber, which were essential to Britain's industrialization. Indeed, the Industrial Revolution depended in large part on a systematic theft from India. Now, 45 trillion, this is just discovered just from India. This does not account for Africa. Many countries that were colonized in Africa. This does not count for the many countries that were colonized inside of the Caribbean. These things are yet to be discovered. We'll discover more and more with time just how horrible and how all-encompassing the colonial system was in depriving people of their day-to-day sustenance. So what's the takeaway for this? Well, number one, this $10.5 billion is nothing, again, but a payoff for the elites. That's my opinion. I have not read an articulation of how that money is going to reverse the colonial situation. And if reparations are not for actually repairing, then what are they for? Again, if you're talking about the masses of Jamaican people, the repair would have to be very significant. The repair would have to be economic. The repair would have to be social. The repair would have to be political. The repair would have to be educational. $10.5 billion will not do that. So it's, to me, going to be more so something to benefit the country's elite and to show face for the present relationship of colonization that continues to exist on Jamaican people. But again, we should all be critical of all of these reparations conversations and should be really understanding, are the people who making these proclamations doing so in an organized fashion where they're actually representing the masses? The actual everyday Jamaicans who are suffering, was there any type of study of their conditions? Was there a deep study of how we're going to lift these people out of poverty? Is there a deep study on how we're going to help inside of the deculturalization campaign, to reverse the deculturalization campaign that the English enforced on the African people there? My bet would be no, there was no such study, that these things are superficial numbers that are put forth by people who are disconnected from the everyday realities of the people and have no care to formally address them. And for that, we have to reject these reparations calls. We have to be outwardly against them, and we have to outwardly question those who are putting forth these types of proclamations. So that's really all I have on this subject. I would love to hear your thoughts, particularly on this $10.5 billion, on the fact that Jamaica is still a part of the Commonwealth making this request, and on the fact that overwhelmingly African people are starting to drive this reparations narrative before actually detaching from the colonial relationship that has continually enslaved the people. So that's all I have. I will see you guys in the next video. Hey family, this is Tierney Cherie. I'm here to make an announcement that I'm very, very excited to make. I'm excited because I really think this is something that is important for our people. Otherwise, I would not have devoted so much time and energy towards it. So I finished my first book, and the book title is Fostering False Identity, the Child Welfare System's Design of Social Control of the Black Family. Now, why is this book something that I think will be very important for our community? Well, number one, it's dealing with the system of white supremacy, particularly the way that the system has targeted our children. If you don't know, our children are literally our future. Without our children, we have no future. And so understand that the system is very crafty when figuring out what to derail first. And to me, it's no mistake that the system particularly went after the Black family. If you look at what happened whenever we were enslaved by this system, and continues to go after the Black family, continues to go after Black children, continues to try to villainize African parents. So for that, I wanted to particularly talk about this subject. Now, the other thing that the book will deal with is our African identities. Why is it that our African identities are a threat to the system? Why is it that whenever we want to identify ourselves as being African, we get so much drawback inside of the Black community? I think a lot of us are not aware of the history of assimilationist thought inside of our community, this idea that we have to be close to white in order to be accepted. And so that's another subject that we delve into in this book. So I'm hoping that anyone who is, obviously, if you're a parent, a Black parent, and you really want to understand why it is that these systems are going after your children, I encourage you to read this book. I hope that it will arm you with a lot of knowledge and a lot of foresight, not just about how to protect your own children, but how to organize in your community, because that's really the purpose of the book, is to say that we have to organize among ourselves in order to protect ourselves from this white supremacist system. And then obviously, if you're an organizer in general, this is something that I think is important for you to read, because like I said, this is a subject in the Black community that we just don't discuss enough. Child welfare is not something that is going to get enough attention. People obviously will organize them around other causes, but this is one that is really important that I feel like we have to pay more attention to.